In this lecture, I want to talk about ideologies. I will start with general remarks and definitions and such, and then delve into the origins, history, and contents of the three most important ideologies, which are liberalism, conservatism, and socialism. I will not talk in this lecture about nationalism, although it may be its own ideology. This is contested. After that, I want to talk about the relationship between different ideologies. Before I continue, I want to make sure we're on the same page regarding the following wording. Liberal means different things in Europe and in the US. In Europe, liberal means market liberal. In the US, liberal means progressive or lefty. In this lecture, I will make an effort to not use liberal without the qualifier market. But if I do, when I talk about liberal and liberalism, we're talking about the market liberal version of it. Why do we need ideologies? What do they accomplish? I invite you to watch the following clip to see just how complicated politics is.
Between the men and the women of the popular MTV series Jersey Shore. For the women, we have Sammy Sweetheart Giancola, Jenny J-Wow Farley, Nicole Snooki Palizzi. Playing for the men, we have Ronnie Ortiz Magro, DJ Paulie Del Vecchio, and of course Mike the Situation Sorrentino. Now the game is simple. I'll ask you general knowledge questions. You answer to the best of your ability. Okay, let's start with the ladies. J-Wow. Why are there two W's in the wow? I'm curious.
Double the pleasure.
Double the pleasure. All right. Let's go to Snooki. Finish the title of this novel by J.D. Salinger. The Catcher in the... Snooki?
Closet.
Catcher in the Closet. All right, Ronnie, go ahead.
In the Rye?
In the Rye. Very good. There you go.
Catcher in the Closet.
Paulie, finish this sentence. We have nothing to fear but...
Fear itself.
Very good. Who said that?
My mom.
Got that right. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. Snooki, who said that?
Uncle Sam.
Uncle Sam?
It's you.
His initials have an R, a D, and an F.
Franklin D. Roosevelt.
That's correct. Very good.
Wow.
Very good. J-Wow, who is this?
Ooh.
President of Iraq.
President of Iraq. No. Interesting guess. All right. Mike, you said I know who that is.
It's the guy from the banking industry, isn't it?
What's his name?
Is it would it be?
That's correct. First name is Ben.
Stein.
Ben Stein.
No. Isn't his last name would it be too?
The last name is a B also. You're so close.
Ben
Yes, keep going.
Bernanke.
What do you start your car with?
Kate.
Ben
Bernanke.
Bernanke, that's correct. Very good. Let's go to Ronnie. Ronnie, what two animals are the symbols of the stock market?
I don't have any stocks. I really wouldn't.
Don't have any stock?
No.
Snooki?
Is it the donkey and the elephant?
No.
Tiger. The leopard.
Tiger and the leopard. No. Sammy?
A lion.
The lion and the what?
Oh, I got one right.
No, I
Lion
just
and the
named an
bear.
animal. No. No, the bull and the bear.
These questions are way harder than the last.
Yeah.
Huh? These are harder questions.
I feel like
You're making more money now. All right, let's go to Mike. Who becomes president if the president and the vice president both die?
Secretary of State?
No. Ronnie?
Oh, the guy that lost, that came second place, is the runner-up, isn't it?
The guy that lost the election?
Yeah, isn't the runner-up?
So McCain would become president?
I would think so.
No. Sammy, what do you got?
Like the wife of somebody who becomes
The wife of somebody who knows a guy.
The wife of the vice president.
The wife of the vice president. No.
Whoever's the third one in line.
Who is third in line for the presidency? Right now, that person would be a woman.
Sarah Palin.
Sarah Palin. Nancy Pelosi would be Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House.
Snooki, what country started the celebration of St. Patrick's Day?
Ireland.
Ireland, very good. And according to legend, what did St. Patrick drive out of Ireland? Sammy?
I'm Italian, not Irish. I have no idea.
So you don't feel you should have to answer any Irish
I don't know. Wait.
Ronnie, what did St. Patrick drive out of Ireland?
Drive, or what did he drive out of Ireland?
He ran something out of Ireland. What was it?
The leprechaun.
The leprechaun. Get the leprechaun. That's why there are no leprechauns in Ireland now when you go there. They were all obviously driven out. Snooki, it's an animal.
A donkey.
No, he drove the donkeys out of Ireland. No. Sammy, you had it before. You named an animal before you had it.
Lion.
No.
Bear. Snake.
No. Snakes! Very good. All right, let's go to Ronnie. Ronnie, what are the 49th and 50th states in the Union? The last two states, what are they?
Hawaii,
And what else?
Puerto Rico,
No.
Mexico.
Mexico. No.
Alaska.
Alaska.
Mexico.
All right, J-Wow, who is this?
Jackie Chan.
Jackie Chan. It's been a rough year for Jackie Chan. Mike?
Korea,
Korea? Which Korea?
North Korea.
That's good. What's his name?
John. No, it's
John?
No, you didn't say that. You didn't say that.
Kim Jong-il.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, Paulie D, who is this?
Oh, that's like
That's easy one.
Don't help him out, guys.
Joan Rivers.
Which one is Joan Rivers?
To the right.
To the right. Now, Sammy?
Barbara Walters.
Barbara Walters and who?
Katie Kirk.
Katie Kirk. Very good, very good. All right. Who wrote Handel's Messiah? Sammy?
No idea.
All right. His name is in the question.
Messiah.
Close. 50% Handel.
Oh.
50% chance of getting it right. Don't ever go to Vegas. Ronnie, who is this?
John McCain.
John McCain. Very
I
good.
mean, the lettering in the back helped me out a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Little clue there.
I can read.
All right. Paulie, if you walked into a bar and the guy said, "This is a Homo sapien bar," what would that mean?
It's a gay bar.
It's a human bar.
It's a human bar. That's correct. All right. Sammy, who is this?
Looks like my father. Is that you when you were young?
Yeah, that is me when I was young. Correct answer. Thank you. Oh, that signal means our game has come to an end. Let's check the final score.
The women of the Jersey.
Why do we need ideologies? Why do we use them? Why do they exist? Politics is complicated, and as you've seen, people aren't necessarily very informed. Yet people have all sorts of opinions. They feel they can make meaningful choices in elections, and ideologies help them. So here is a definition. Ideologies map the political and social world for us. We simply cannot do without them because we cannot act without making sense of the world we inhabit. Making sense, let it be said, does not always mean that making good or right sense. But ideologies will often contain a lot of common sense. This is by Michael Frieden. I will rely in this lecture very heavily on Andrew Highwood's Political Ideologies and Introduction, which is an outstanding book if you're interested in the topic. Haywood defines ideologies in the following way. An ideology is a more or less coherent set of ideas that provides the basis for organized political action that is intended to preserve, modify, or overthrow the existing system of power. All ideologies therefore have the following features. They A. offer an account of the existing order, usually in the form of a worldview. B. advance a model of the desired future, a vision of the good society. And C. explain how political change can and should be brought about, how to get from A to B. Put in a figure, one could show the features of ideologies like so: a critique of existing order, a vision of a future and better society, and a theory of political change or action. There is a bewildering set of candidates for ideologies or different isms. However, we will really concentrate on the three most important and classical ideologies. They are liberalism, conservatism, and socialism. Among the classical ideologies, one could also discuss nationalism, anarchism, and fascism. However, nationalism is probably too versatile and too mixed with the classical three ideologies to merit its own discussion, and so I will concentrate squarely on the liberalism, conservatism, and socialism ideologies. There is a more recent set of ideologies here on the right side: feminism, ecologism, postmodernism, religious fundamentalism, multiculturalism, and so on and so forth, but we will essentially ignore them for this lecture. To make things a little worse, these ideologies aren't clearly defined, and different authors and different scholars and different thinkers and different philosophers would define them differently. There's often also splits within ideologies, and to keep it manageable, what I will do is I will discuss the three main ideologies and then a single split within each of them. So within liberalism, I will briefly discuss the difference between classical liberalism and modern liberalism. When it comes to conservatism, we will look at a particular type of conservatism called Christian democracy, which is very important in Europe. And when it comes to socialism, we will look at social democracy as a particular version of socialism. Ideologies talk about different things and address different problems and issues and have different views on different topics. There is no way to discuss all of the differences of ideologies and all of the things that they say about different issues. I will try to essentially populate this table. So I will concentrate on the sometimes competing views in terms of the human nature, in terms of the role of individuals, in terms of the society, in terms of equality, and in terms of property, as seen by different thinkers in the tradition of liberalism, conservatism, and socialism, respectively. I personally find it useful to think about the three main ideologies of liberalism, conservatism, and socialism in terms of three core values, namely liberty, equality, and order. And most people think that these are desirable goals, liberty, equality, and order. However, they put different emphasis on what should be supreme among these values. And one simple scheme that's not very widely used, but I find quite useful, is to suggest that liberalism really focuses on liberty, conservatism really focuses on order, and socialism really focuses on equality. The three main ideologies that we cover in this lecture are fairly recent in the grand scheme of things. Classical liberalism arose during the Enlightenment as a reaction to absolutism. Important thinkers include John Locke and Adam Smith. Conservatism is a reaction in many ways to the French Revolution and the radical changes and, in a way, excesses it brings. The most important thinker here is Edmund Burke and later Friedrich von Hayek. In the 19th century, socialism and some other ideologies or sub-ideologies emerge as a reaction to the new reality of capitalism that leads to a clear-cut difference between those that own the means of production and those that only own labor, and that leads to widespread poverty and distress. And socialism is the ideology that criticizes the status quo and promises a different picture. The important thinkers here are Karl Marx, later Lenin. However, some people have argued that socialism really is gone, that we have seen the death of socialism or the end of ideologies, because the main proponent of socialism, namely the Soviet Union and the collapse of communism more generally, really leaves no alternative to capitalism. So in many ways you can think of ideologies as reactions to a status quo that is deemed undesirable. So the ideologies that we'll talk about emerged in the following order. First, we have liberalism, and liberalism is a reaction to absolutism. Second, we have conservatism, and conservatism is a reaction to the French Revolution. Then we have this semi-ideology nationalism, which is a reaction to the French occupation by Napoleon. So Napoleon occupies large parts of Europe, and that leads to all sorts of nationalist reactions in the countries that are occupied and want to have self-determination. And in many ways, socialism can be seen as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. Fascism and its most extreme form, Nazism, developed in the early 20th century, arguably as a reaction to what is seen as the failings of all the other existing ideologies, liberalism, conservatism, socialism, and or communism. And then we have the new ideologies of the 20th century also as a reaction to perceived failures of liberalism, that's environmentalism, ecologism, postmodernism, and feminism. So in many ways, ideologies emerge as a reaction to an undesirable status quo. The origins of liberalism lay with the Enlightenment period. During that time period, we see the breakdown of feudalism in Western Europe. We see a rise of a capitalist society. A little later, we see a rise of the middle class. And we see an erosion of the old order. Before liberalism came along, the prevailing view of the world was that if people suffered under a bad king, that was God's will, and you couldn't disobey a bad king because that was a sin. So we have these absolutist societies in Europe, not everywhere, but in most European countries. And liberals during the Enlightenment challenge absolutism. They challenge the absolute power of the monarchy. They challenge the hegemony of the church. They criticize the privileges of the landed aristocracy. They criticize the unfair feudal system where social position is determined by birth and not by effort or meritocracy. And they oppose the oppressive means of religion and support the movement towards more freedom of conscience. And they do question the authority of the church. In the 19th century, liberalism really takes off and spreads rapidly with the rapidly spreading industrialization. And at its early incarnation, liberalism has this very narrow view of what governments are supposed to do. And we call this the laissez-faire market liberalism that promotes minimal government intervention. Liberalism is a very powerful ideology which has shaped the Western political tradition dramatically. It surely has shaped the American government form in America in important ways, and is arguably the dominant ideology in America, also the dominant ideology in the West. And this has been so dominant, the influence of liberalism, that an important thinker, Francis Fukuyama, has proclaimed in an important and famous book, The End of Ideology, where he argues that we've seen essentially liberalism win the struggle of different ideologies, because once we have communism collapse in the 1980s, 1990s, all viable alternatives to market capitalism are gone. The central themes of liberalism have to do with a commitment to the individual and the idea that we should construct societies in which individuals can satisfy their interests and achieve fulfillment and can act as they wish as long as they don't harm others. Some of its core values have to do with individualism, rationalism, freedom, justice, and toleration. And the view of individuals is a positive one. Individuals are endowed with reason. They can and want to think. They can and want to understand the world. They are born equal, but they're not the same. And they should be rewarded according to their talents and efforts. So liberalism is fine with inequality as long as it's meritocratic. Liberal societies are societies that are diverse and plural and that are tolerant. And they emerge because individuals get together and find consensus that they want a government that protects certain rights and liberties. For liberalism, individualism is very important, individualism means that the individual is of supreme importance over any social group or collective body. So individuals are more important than societies. Other ideologies disagree with this. Liberty or freedom is the overarching topic and theme in liberalism. People can have the ability to think and act as they wish and should have that. Individuals should have freedom, however, only within limits, so you can only pursue your own dreams and your own happiness if you do not harm others. Rationalism is another core value of liberalism, and it means that people think that the world has a rational structure, that we can explore the world, that we can understand the world, that we can criticize the existing order and things like this. Justice, another important core value of liberalism, means that we should apply standards of fairness and impartiality, that individuals are equal in the sense that they're born equal, so that every individual is of equal worth, however, and has the same rights, and they should have the same opportunities. But liberalism does not think that everybody is the same, and liberalism believes that people are endowed with different skills and talents and offer different degrees of effort, and so people should be rewarded proportional to these things, proportional to their skills and talents and their effort. And so for liberalism, inequality in incomes, for example, is perfectly fine, though they would want to see equality of opportunity. With these core values of liberalism, we also see that toleration is important, where toleration simply means that you're willing to accept the views or actions of someone that you disagree with. So let's start populating this table. So the view of the human nature in liberalism is a positive one. Individuals are inherently good, they're self-reliant, they're governed by reason, they pursue their own happiness. They might do this in selfish ways, but this is fine with liberalism. So individuals are free to pursue their individual goals. A society is simply a collection of individuals that are working together and that have agreed that it is in their interest to form a government in order to protect certain rights. In terms of equality, liberalism is fine with inequality of outcomes as long as we the equality of opportunity is given. So people are born equal, but they're not born the same. And for liberalism, private property is fine, and it's used for personal benefit. As I said, there are different branches of ideologies and sub-ideologies and divisions in ideologies. I'll try to keep it really simple. I want to make within liberalism only one distinction, and that's the distinction between classical liberalism and modern liberalism. Here on the left we see some points that classical liberalism emphasizes, while on the right we see similar issues differently addressed by modern or social or welfare liberalism. If you talk about liberalism today, we talk about the liberalism here on the right side. So in the early form of classical liberalism, there was no role of government besides the guarantee of basic fundamental rights. Governments were not supposed to regulate markets. States were supposed to be minimal. And the conception of freedom here really is that freedom is the absence of constraints upon the individual. So it's a negative freedom, freedom from government intervention. The welfare liberalism has a different take on this. Welfare liberalism, or social or modern liberalism, is realizing or arguing that if you leave capitalism unregulated, you will see huge injustices, and therefore some state intervention and some degree of regulation is necessary. It should be fairly minimal, but it will exist, because state intervention will enlarge liberty. For example, it is a state intervention to say that you cannot exploit children and make it illegal in order for these children to be able to get an education and have a chance to pursue their own happiness. So it's a freedom conception that is focused on personal development and self-realization, and it's therefore a positive freedom. The freedom requires that governments intervene in the social and economic sphere to some degree. For example, by providing education, healthcare, housing, and such. I assume that for most Americans, liberalism just sounds like common sense, and that's, I would assume, the case because liberalism is all over the American Constitution, and it's deeply ingrained in the political culture of the country. So if you look at the Declaration of Independence, it's full of liberalism ideas. All human beings are created equal. So this is the idea that I mentioned a while ago, that everybody is born equal. So this is the ideal of political and legal equality. Then it goes on, they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So people have these rights. Governments are supposed to protect these rights. That's the next sentence. Governments are instituted to protect those rights. And governments can do this because the governed consent that the government has that right. And if the government violates those rights, then people have the right to abolish or alter it. This really goes back to John Locke and his idea that people are in a state of nature and previl societies have the following problem. While on the one hand, they're rational, free, and equal, and perfectly capable of running their own lives, and while they have rights to life, health, liberty, and possessions that no one should harm, there is no mechanism that guarantees those rights. So there's no police, there's no courts that make sure that the strong do not prey upon the weak. And the solution, John Locke suggests, is that people get together and find consensus to set up a government that protects those rights. So to secure their rights, people give up some amount of freedom and form a government. And that government is really a contract among the governed. And if the government misbehaves, they can be essentially changed. I invite you to read a little bit around here on this slide, which is taken from the Haywood book I mentioned above. It lists key figures in liberalism. It's not an uncontested collection, I would say, but it's at least one view one could take on this. So if you want to read up a little bit on Adam Smith or John Locke or some others, here is a way of doing it. Conservatism comes after liberalism. It emerges in the late 18th and early 19th century. And it really can be understood as a reaction to the rapid changes that we see in this time period in terms of economic and social changes, political changes. The French Revolution rattles Europe in 1789. And so conservatism says, slow it down a little bit. The important thinker here is Edmund Burke. Conservatism plays an important role in a morphed version, which is Christian democracy, which leads to Christian democratic parties, which play an important role in some European countries after World War II. There is some influence of conservatism in both the UK and the US since Reagan and Thatcher, respectively, which is this new right in politics, which on the one hand wants a strong state with relatively limited state intervention, which is this market liberalism in many ways, but it is mixed with a social authoritarianism which prescribes all sorts of positions on moral values such as abortion and gay rights and things like this, which for liberalism is not something problematic because these are issues and topics that are people's personal problems, and you're supposed to tolerate whatever makes other people happy as long as it doesn't harm anybody. Conservatism has a bit of a bad press, and people have argued it's really content-free, it's just the ideology of the ruling class. People have said it's intellectually modest, it has no fixed substantive position, it's simply against change, they're just there this ideology just wants to defend the existing order. I don't think that's fair. I think conservatism has clearly identifiable characteristics, and those include a desire to conserve the existing status quo and the social order, which goes hand in hand with resistance to or suspicion of or even anxiety about change, and a distinction into natural versus unnatural change. So change really is something that for conservatism is highly suspect. Some central themes include tradition, human imperfection, organic society, authority, and property. I'll talk about these in a second. So the view of individuals is pessimistic. Individuals are limited, they're dependent, they are security-seeking, they're morally corrupt, they're selfish, greedy, and power-hungry, so we need to somehow control them. They can't understand the world is too complex for them. And so a society needs to be founded on laws that insulate it from human control. There is some sort of extra-human origin of the social order. Typically it's a god, or it's nature, or it's history, or biology, or economics. Something that's not set up by humans, but it's natural one way or another. And governments need to be strong in terms of law and order to keep those individuals that are morally corrupt and limited and security-seeking in place. And they need to control the unruly elements in society. Here are some core values of conservatism, along with a brief discussion. Order and tradition really are the overarching concerns of conservatism, because the accumulated wisdom of the past is valuable, and we have set up institutions and practices that are hard to establish, and they have been tested by time, and therefore we should not just abandon them and change them. Humans, as mentioned, are not perfect. They're not perfectible even. They're selfish, power-hungry, and greedy. They're psychologically limited. They need to know their place. They can't master the world. And because people are these unruly elements potentially, they need to be punished, and we need to have strong law and order in order to keep these elements in check. Societies are seen as an organism, so we have an organic society idea here. The whole is more than a collection of its individual parts. Individuals need society and are supposed to perform certain functions in society. Societies are shaped by natural factors that are beyond human control, and societies therefore cannot be bettered, and they need to be preserved, and institutions and values need to be honored. Another related core value of conservatism is the idea of hierarchy and authority. The idea is that we have these organic societies that need different roles to be filled, and people are supposed to perform those roles. So some people are leaders, others are followers. Some people are managers, others are workers. Some are breadwinners, others are child rearers. And that's just fine. And there should not be equality. It's undesirable, it's unachievable. You're supposed to be in your place, and you're supposed to know your place. And authority is something good in this worldview, because someone tells you where you stand and what you're supposed to do. Property, Haywood has this nice quotation on this. He says that conservatism has this obsession almost with property. So property possesses a deep, almost mystical significance for conservatives. And that's because it makes you independent from government. It creates ownership and stakes in society, so people care about society. It gives people obligations, and it gives them something to conserve. we can now fill in this table. So the human nature view in conservatism is a negative one, unlike in liberalism. People are inherently imperfect and selfish, and they're security-seeking. Individuals are part of a greater whole and should obey the natural order and should perform the roles that they're assigned. So equality is natural, and inequality is undesirable and unachievable. So societies are like organisms and therefore naturally hierarchical. And as mentioned, private property really is an important value for conservatism, and it is a necessity for stability. As with all ideologies, there's a bewildering subset of different isms within an ideology. So there's different conservatisms, there is authoritarian conservatism, there's paternalistic conservatism, there's libertarian conservatism, and then there's Christian democracy. And because it plays an important role in the development of Western Europe, let me focus here really only on Christian democracy. Christian democracy is an ideological tradition within European conservatism that is characterized by a commitment to the social market and qualified economic intervention. It comes from Catholicism, but today it's not Catholic, it's confessional. So Christian democratic parties in Europe, where they exist, such as in Germany, tend to be confessional. So you don't have to be a Catholic to be a Christian Democrat. In fact, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, is Protestant and is heading the Christian Democratic Party. So Christian Democratic parties have a more benign view about government intervention. So they want social partnerships between competing interests in society. So they want to get employers and employees at the same table and bargain things out. They're happy with quite heavy state intervention, and they want that markets are social, so that the economy is structured by market principles, but also that the market forces, the potentially adverse effects of markets are ameliorated by comprehensive compensation or welfare systems. Here are some important thinkers of conservatism. I invite you to read some of these. Socialism emerges as a reaction to the dismal circumstances for most people generated by the early industrialization. These dismal circumstances, wide impoverishment and desperateness, unemployment, things like this, was not well addressed by the typical liberalism political parties in the 19th century. So the working population or the working class really did not have any players in government that would support their interests and fight for their interests. And so this new and growing class of industrial workers that suffers poverty and degradation starts to form unions, and then unions start to form parties. And the ideology that they can rely on is the ideology of socialism. So for classical liberalism or for market liberalism, at the time, poverty was a result of bad choices or a failure of the individual. And for socialism, that's very different. It is the result of exploitation of individuals and of the system. So in many ways, socialism is defined by its opposition to capitalism. And what it wants to do is offer a more human or humane and socially worthwhile alternative. Socialism can be defined as an ideology that argues that citizens are best served by policies focused on meeting the basic needs of the entire society rather than on serving the needs of individuals as individuals. And so some of its core values, or the overarching core value, is equality. It puts cooperation over competition, and it puts collectivism over individualism. Equality is the defining core value of socialism. the commitment to equality makes socialism most different from liberalism and conservatism. Equality is so important for socialism because it supposedly promotes freedom by satisfying material needs, and it provides the basis for personal fulfillment. There's various arguments that socialism would put forward for why egalitarianism or equality or the equality of outcomes is desirable. They would argue it's just, it's fair, because inequality is a result of an unequal structure of society. They would say it betters society and things like this. However, the degree of equality differs across different brands of socialism. If you have your classical Marxist, they want to abolish capitalism and all inequality. They want to abolish private property and want to collectivize everything. If you have more reformed socialists, they want to tame capitalism. They are fine with some degree of social equality, but they do want to tame markets and have some degree of redistribution. Community is another core value of socialism. It's a very positive view of humans that socialism has. Humans being are social creatures. They're willing to pursue goals together. They can cooperate, and they're willing to work together to better society. So cooperation is a third core value. People are capable of collective efforts. They can and do want to help each other. They have this common goals. They think of themselves as comrades or brothers and sisters, and they don't need financial incentives to work. People actually desire to contribute to the common good and help other people. We are now in a position to fill this table for socialism. So the view of human nature in socialism is a positive one. Humans are inherently good. They're social creatures that are willing to cooperate. Individuals want to support the common good, and they can do it, and they're willing to sacrifice. The society is more important than the individual. Equality is a fundamental goal, or the fundamental goal of socialism. And private property, at least in some versions of socialism, is seen as the main cause of inequality and therefore should be abolished. As with the other main ideologies, there is a bewildering set of varieties and divisions and rival traditions of different types of socialisms. This is particularly the case for socialism because it's such an academic exercise. The main lines of division are about the goals and the end of socialism and communism. So it's either communism or social democracy. The second division line is how we get there, and the question is, should we go there through revolution or should we get there through evolution? And so different socialisms include utopian socialism, scientific socialism, fundamentalist socialism, and so on and so forth. The one that I want to focus on, and the only one I want to focus on, is social democracy, which is a very important political force in Western Europe and has been decisively shaping the history of Western Europe and its capitalism. It emerges in around the mid-20th century, and it takes an ideological stance that supports a broad balance between market capitalism, which is the system that liberalism would also support, and state intervention. So in a sense, it accepts capitalism as the best way of organizing markets, but it wants to tame those markets more so than market liberalism wants. So social democracy seeks a compromise between market forces, which are characterized by inequality, and the state, or the idea of political equality and equality of outcomes. So in many ways, social democracy wants to humanize or reform capitalism, not abolish it. Just to make sure, there is no single theory of social democracy. There is no systematic underlying theory, but there is typical views associated with thinkers and theorists of social democracy. These include that capitalism is the name of the game, it's the only reliable means of generating wealth, but it needs to be fixed to some degree. These can and should be rectified through economic and social intervention, so government should intervene in markets to some degree. And social change should be brought about peacefully and constitutionally. Here are some key figures of socialism, and I invite you to read up on this slide a little bit. Now we have the entire table for views in terms of human nature, the individual, society, equality, and private property for the three main ideologies discussed in this lecture. So in many ways that's a summary of the previous discussion. At the beginning, we defined the following features of ideologies. We said that they offer a critique of the existing order, so they explain the world. They provide a vision of a future society, and they have a theory of political change, so that's the action component. Let's try to summarize the three main ideologies on these three features. So liberalism, in terms of explaining the current order, would say that the social conditions are the result of individual choices. The vision for a better society is a society in which the individuals are free and don't harm each other. And the action that liberalism wants is essentially a promotion of liberty and opportunity. Conservatism sees social conditions as the result of human imperfection. The vision of a society is one that's hierarchic and where people live in harmony, in a hierarchical harmony with each other. And the action is essentially no change. The past has been better and should be preserved. In socialism, social conditions are seen as the result of exploitative class relations. The vision is a society that's free of exploitation and characterized by equality, and the action, at least in some versions of socialism, is revolution, in other versions is taming of capitalism. In terms of the relationship between these different ideologies, I already mentioned the LEO, or Liberty, Equality, Order idea, which is the idea that all three of these values are embraced generally, but that different ideologies put emphasis on different values. So for liberalism, liberty is the prime value. For socialism, equality is the prime value. And for conservatism, order is the prime value. A more common way of ordering ideologies or think about ideologies is to put them on a left-right spectrum, because many of the central themes of disagreement have to do with economic factors. I'll get to that in a second. Others have said, no, we need to use a horseshoe spectrum, and then there's multidimensional representations of ideological spaces. In terms of a linear spectrum, we are very familiar with talking about left and right, at least in Europe, or in the US, the more common way is to talk about conservative and progressive. And if you want to order ideologies on a left-right spectrum, most people would come up with the following order, with communism and socialism on the very left, liberalism in the middle, conservatism towards the right, and then fascism towards the very right. And that is to some degree a useful mapping of ideologies on a one-dimensional space, not least because the party systems in Europe look a lot like this linear spectrum. So in many ways, European party systems have a bunch of parties related to these ideologies. So in most party systems, at least you used to have communist parties, although they typically are now gone. But you have new left parties, you have social democratic parties which are committed to socialism or to a tamed version of socialism. You have green parties which have many social democratic elements in their platforms. You do have liberal parties which directly stem from liberalism as an ideology. And in Europe, you have conservative parties in some countries and Christian democratic parties in other countries, and both of them feed from the ideology of conservatism. And then you have a new crop of radical right parties. This is the new kid on the block, which in many ways goes back to nationalistic, fascist ideas and ideological stances. Some people have observed that really, if you look at the history of ideologies and battles between ideologies, things got a little more complicated in the 1920s and 30s, where fascism, which is supposedly on the very right, and communism, which is supposedly on the very left, they're actually pretty similar. Because it's true that fascism is anti-communist and anti-capitalist, but in many ways, communism is also anti-capitalist, and it's also totalitarian. And so some people in the 50s and 60s came up with the horseshoe spectrum of ordering ideologies. The basic idea of the horseshoe spectrum is that communism on the extreme left and fascism on the extreme right share certain commonalities, and so we should put them spatially closer together, and this is what this oval or horseshoe shape does. You note that socialism, liberalism, and conservatism are pretty close together ideologically. In more recent years, it has become more common to talk about the political space as multidimensional, typically two-dimensional. So here is a typical two-dimensional space. This is taken from the Political Compass website, where there is an economic left and an economic right. So on the left, you're more for redistribution, you're fine with taxation and spending. On the right, you're against those things, you can tolerate more inequality, you want less market intervention, you want less regulation, things like that. But there are issues that don't map on these things. If you think about immigration, it's not clear at all what the left or right position would be. If you think about abortion, it's not clear what that means in terms of left and right. And if you think about gay rights and some of these other issues that are non-economic, they really don't fit a simple left-right, linear, one-dimensional space. And so people say we need a second dimension, and that dimension is often called libertarian versus authoritarian, where libertarian are positions that are in many ways derived from liberalism, so toleration, everybody can pursue their preferences as long as they don't harm others, individual choice and rationality. These are values associated with libertarianism in this scheme. And on the other hand, you have authoritarianism or authoritarian values, which come more from the tradition of conservatism, with its pessimism about people's abilities and its negative view of individuals and the moral imperfection of individuals and the need for order and the need for punishment and the need for strong laws and things like this. So these are the other positions. So in American terms, if you think about this two-dimensional space, most people would place the Democratic Party somewhere on the left libertarian side, mainly because most Democrats or the Democratic Party is a pro-choice party. And then you would have the Republicans on the upper right quadrant, where you have more conservative values in terms of the economy and markets, and you have more conservative values in terms of abortion and gay rights. So you're less eager to embrace gay rights, you're pro-life, these kinds of values. So in many party systems, the political axis really goes from left libertarian to authoritarian right. I invite you to explore the Political Compass online. The link is www.politicalcompass.org. And not only can you take a test that places you in the two-dimensional ideological space, you can also read up on where famous people would fit in this ideological space. Do not take this too seriously, because neither Gandhi nor Stalin nor Hitler nor Thatcher nor Friedman have filled in their little questionnaire. So the authors of that website have come up with positions for these people based on where they think they would stand on the answers of their questionnaire, but it's still fun to look at this. You can also see, for example, the US election of 2012 and where politicians stood in that election. So it's just an interesting website to explore. You can also find the positions of politicians in the two-dimensional space in the 2016 presidential election in the US. Again, it's fun to explore this, but do not take it too seriously.